For years, I thought my marriage was perfect until the day she left. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence. For years passed, and I had started to heal, slowly moving on from the agony of betrayal. But then she came back. She was a different person, or so I thought. This story is about how I uncovered the twisted truth behind my wife's disappearance, the shocking betrayal she'd kept hidden, and my ruthless revenge, designed to tear her life apart. But is revenge really sweet, or does it leave an even deeper wound? Stay tuned for the journey that kept me awake at night, and trust me, you won't believe how it ends. I had always believed I knew her better than anyone else. Emily, my wife for 5 years. She had been the center of my universe. We had a life that many would envy. A house in the suburbs of Atlanta, 2 cars in the driveway, and a career that was flourishing. But as I sit here now, for years later, I can hardly recognize the person I was back then. The man who once trusted her with everything is gone. For years ago, she just disappeared. No argument, no explanation, just an empty house and a phone call that lasted 2 minutes. I was left standing in the kitchen, holding a glass of water, as if I had just been told she was going on a business trip. But this was different. Emily left me. The person I thought I would grow old with had chosen to leave without a single word. The days that followed were filled with confusion, anger, pain. I tried to convince myself that maybe something had happened, that she had been forced into it. But deep down, I knew. She had left. For good. I spent countless nights searching through old photos, looking for something that would explain why. But there were no answers. Just pictures of happy times that now felt like lies. Every text she had ever sent seemed like it was just a mask. But even after everything, I couldn't stop wanting to understand what had really happened. Why did she leave me? I tried moving on, of course. You can only wallow in pain for so long before it consumes you completely. I threw myself into work, buried myself in the daily grind. But deep inside, a hole was left. It wasn't until last week that I got that phone call. The one that changed everything. "Hey, Mark, it's Emily." The voice I hadn't heard in so long was the same, but the words she said were anything but. She wanted to meet. "I need to talk to you." I didn't know what to feel. Should I be angry? Should I feel relieved? The last time I heard her voice, she was telling me that she needed space. She was never the same after that. So why now? Why after 4 years? I agreed to meet, even though every part of me told me it was a bad idea. But the truth was, I couldn't let go of the one thing I still craved: answers. The meeting place was a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, one of those places that had that nostalgic charm, dimly lit with old wooden tables and a faint smell of coffee in the air. I arrived early, nerves twisting in my stomach. I couldn't stop pacing around, trying to calm my thoughts. But as the minutes ticked by, my mind raced. Why had she called? After all this time, why now? She walked in, and my heart sank. Emily, the woman who had shattered my world, now standing before me, looking the same yet different. Her hair was longer, styled differently. She seemed older, more worn, like she'd lived 1,000 lives in the years we'd been apart. But there was something else. A coldness in her eyes, like all the warmth I had once known was buried deep beneath layers of regret, anger, and guilt. She sat down slowly, eyes meeting mine for the first time in years. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence between us felt like a weight, crushing, suffocating. I was afraid to speak, afraid that if I did, the anger would spill out. It was a delicate thing, holding my emotions in check. But I couldn't stay silent forever. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice coming out quieter than I intended. "Why did you leave me, Emily? 4 years. No calls, no explanation. Not even a word." She shifted in her seat, biting her lip as if considering her next words carefully. "I was lost, Mark. I didn't know who I was anymore. I needed to find myself." I looked at her, searching her face for something. Anything that could explain why she had done this. But all I saw was a woman who had made her choice. "You think disappearing was the way to do that? You think abandoning me without even an explanation was the way to find yourself?" I could feel my anger bubbling up, but I held it back. I needed to know the truth. Her eyes darted around the cafe, avoiding mine. She seemed uncomfortable. It wasn't like that, she said quietly, almost as if she were trying to convince herself. I didn't want to hurt you, but I was with someone else. More than one person. And I couldn't face you after that. I couldn't face myself. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew she'd been unfaithful. Everyone told me she had been seeing other men. But hearing her admit it so coldly, so without remorse, was something I wasn't prepared for. You what? My voice cracked, barely a whisper. You were with other people? While I was at home, thinking you were still my wife. Emily's face softened, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But the damage was already done. I'm so sorry, Mark. I never meant for it to go this far. I was confused, and I made choices that I regret. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process what she was saying. The woman I had trusted, my wife, the one I had given everything to, had been living a lie. And now, here she was, confessing it like it was a minor mistake, something she could easily move on from. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something at her, to make her feel the pain I had felt all these years. But instead, I did something I hadn't expected. I nodded. I see, I said, my voice tight. You don't have to apologize. The damage is already done. She reached across the table, her hand trembling. Mark, please, I just need you to understand. I was messed up. I needed time. Time away from everything. But now, I want to fix things. I looked at her hand, inches from mine. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Fix things, I repeated bitterly. You can't just fix something you broke. You can't just walk back into my life like nothing happened. Her face crumpled, and she pulled her hand back, tears slipping down her cheeks. I don't expect you to forgive me, Mark. I just wanted to see you again, to tell you that I regret it all, that I've changed. But the truth was, I didn't care about her regrets. I didn't care if she had changed. The woman who had stood before me 4 years ago, the one who swore she loved me, was gone. And in her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone who had destroyed everything we built together. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, echoing in the silence between us. You should have thought about that before you ran off with everyone else. I don't have time for this anymore. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the cafe, the door closing behind me with a finality that felt like the end of an era. But even as I walked away, something inside me stirred. Revenge. It had been 4 years, and the wounds were still fresh. The pain of her betrayal had never really gone away. Now I knew what I had to do. It was time for her to pay for what she had done to me. I didn't sleep that night. In fact, I don't think I slept properly for weeks after that meeting. Something about seeing her again, hearing her empty apologies, triggered a darkness within me that I didn't know was still there. I spent every waking hour replaying our conversation, dissecting every word, every movement, trying to find some trace of the woman I once loved. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. Emily hadn't changed. She didn't want to fix things. She wanted to fix herself. She was trying to ease her guilt, to make herself feel better for the choices she made. And I, the fool, had let her walk out of my life so easily. Couldn't let her get away with it. The next few days felt like a blur. I was consumed with the idea of revenge. It wasn't just about hurting her. It was about taking back control. Emily had taken everything from me. My trust, my peace, my sense of who I was. She had stripped me of my dignity. And I couldn't just sit back and let her live her life like nothing had happened. But how could I make her understand the depth of her betrayal? How could I make her feel the weight of the years I had spent suffering because of her? I had to make her regret it. It was then that I realized something chilling. Revenge wasn't just about punishment. It was about power. Emily had always controlled the narrative of our relationship. She had always been the one to call the shots. Even now, after everything, she had the audacity to come back into my life, thinking she could just pick up where we left off. No, that wasn't going to happen. I started gathering information. People she had been with, the places she'd been hiding, the lies she had told. I had friends who had kept an eye on her, even when I had been too broken to care. I didn't want to be the guy who took pleasure in other people's misery, but in this case, I wasn't going to be merciful. I had to know everything. The first thing I did was track down one of her ex-lovers. His name was John, a man she had been seeing while we were married. Emily had always told me he was just a friend, but I had my doubts. Turns out I was right. John and Emily had been more than friends. They had been more than casual lovers. They had been in an affair for almost a year before she left me. I met John one evening in a quiet bar. He looked just like I expected, cocky, self-assured, as if he owned the world. He didn't know who I was at first, and when I introduced myself, I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Emily had told him I was some kind of soft guy, someone who wouldn't fight back. Maybe she had thought that would make it easier for her to manipulate me. But now I was anything but soft. "Mark," he said, trying to act nonchalant as he offered me a drink. "I didn't expect to see you here. What's up?" I could tell by his smirk that he wasn't afraid of me. He probably thought I was here to beg for answers, to plead with him to tell me why Emily had left me. But he was wrong. "I'm not here to ask for your sympathy, John," I said, leaning in close enough that he could feel the tension in my voice. "I'm here to ask for the truth. About Emily." He raised an eyebrow, surprised by my tone. "The truth? She's not the angel you thought she was, man. She had her reasons for leaving." "Did she?" I asked, my voice cold now. "Or did she just use you as an excuse to escape? I don't need your pity. But I want to know everything. How it started, when it started, what she told you about me. I want to know how she justified destroying everything we had." John looked around, making sure no one was eavesdropping. "Look, Mark, I don't want any part of this," he said, his voice dropping. "She's the one you should be talking to, not me. But since you're asking, I'll tell you. She never loved you the way you thought she did. You were her safe option. She knew you'd never leave her, and that's why she stayed with you for as long as she did." I felt like I had been slapped across the face. The words hit harder than any punch ever could. Emily had never loved me. I was just a backup, a place to fall when everything else fell apart. "Is that all?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, even though a storm was brewing inside me. "She just used me?" John nodded. "Yeah, man, that's the truth. She was never going to be happy with you. She needed something else, something more exciting." I stood up, trying to hold back the wave of anger that threatened to overtake me. "You've said enough," I told him, my voice low. "But don't think you've won anything. You're just another pawn in her game. And when this is over, you'll see exactly what kind of person she really is." John didn't say anything else as I walked out of the bar. The weight of his words hung in the air, suffocating me with the realization that I had never truly known the woman I had married. She had been playing me all along. I felt a fire ignite inside me. I would make her pay. And it would be more than just telling her how much she had hurt me. It would be about exposing her, showing her for the liar and manipulator she truly was. I wasn't going to let her walk back into my life like nothing had happened. No, this was only the beginning. The games had just begun. I spent the next few days gathering more pieces of the puzzle. Emily had been living a double life, and I wasn't about to let her escape the consequences. With every bit of information I uncovered, the truth became clearer. She hadn't just betrayed me with John. There were others. The darkness inside me was growing, feeding off the pain of betrayal. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about how easily she had lied, how effortlessly she had destroyed everything I had worked so hard for. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about making her feel the same helplessness and anger I had felt. She had taken my future and ripped it apart. Now it was my turn to tear hers apart. I had already spoken to John, but now I needed to see where Emily had been hiding the rest of her secrets. Her new life, her new relationships. I had to know what had been going on during the time she had disappeared from my world. So, I did what any person with a burning need for justice would do. I started to dig into her new life. I learned that she had moved in with someone new, a man named Ryan, who seemed like the perfect replacement for me. Charming, successful, and, from what I could tell, completely unaware of her past. Ryan worked in finance, and from what I gathered, he was the type of man Emily could manipulate effortlessly. He seemed to be exactly the kind of guy who wouldn't ask too many questions. And that made him the perfect target. I had to get closer to Ryan, but not as a friend. I needed him to see Emily for who she truly was, and I needed to do it in a way that would tear their world apart. I couldn't just sit back and let her move on like this. She didn't deserve peace. She deserved to know that I was watching every step she took. I spent hours on the phone with people who knew Emily, old friends, acquaintances, anyone who might know where she had been during the last 4 years. Some of them didn't want to talk. Others had their own stories, their own grievances with her. I used everything I could. Every scrap of information was a weapon. But the real breakthrough came when I found out about a business trip Emily and Ryan had planned together. She had never mentioned anything about it to me. Of course, why would she? She had no reason to be transparent anymore. But I knew this was my opportunity. I showed up at the airport. Not to confront her, no, that would have been too easy. I was smarter than that. I didn't want her to see me coming. I needed her to experience the fear that I had felt when she left me. The kind of fear that makes you wonder who else is watching you, waiting for you to slip. I followed them to their gate. Emily seemed oblivious, lost in conversation with Ryan. Her laugh was so fake, so rehearsed. I had heard that laugh 1,000 times, and I knew it was just a mask she wore to hide her guilt. Ryan, on the other hand, seemed completely enchanted by her. It disgusted me. He didn't know a single thing about the woman he was about to board a plane with. I watched them board, my mind racing. I had already bought my ticket under a fake name. I wasn't about to let them enjoy this trip without me. I was going to make sure that Emily saw exactly what it felt like to have someone invade your life. To take what was yours. To ruin everything. The flight was long, but my focus was unshakable. I didn't even care about the destination. All I cared about was getting close enough to Emily to make her realize how small her world really was. I had to find the right moment, the right chance to make her feel everything I had felt. The helplessness, the betrayal, the loss of trust. We landed in New York. Emily and Ryan walked out of the terminal hand in hand. She looked more at ease than I had ever seen her, as if everything was right in her world. That was the moment I knew what I had to do. I followed them for hours, keeping my distance, letting them think they were safe. Emily never suspected a thing. Ryan didn't have a clue. They went to dinner, then to a quiet bar for drinks. They were in their little bubble, unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. I had arranged it all. My first step was simple. I hacked into her phone. It didn't take long. I knew the weak points, the places where she would have left herself exposed. It was easy to find the messages. Texts she had sent to her other lovers, the ones she had kept hidden from Ryan. The texts that told the story of a woman who had lied to everyone in her life. I saved everything. Every single conversation. Every photo. Every confession she had made to men who had no idea they were just another part of her game. But it wasn't enough to just expose her. No, I needed more. I needed Ryan to see it. I needed him to look into her eyes and realize that everything he had been told about Emily was a lie. So I did what no one ever expected. I sent those texts straight to his phone. He had no idea what hit him. The moment he read them, I could see his entire world crumble. He looked at Emily, his face a mix of shock, disbelief, and anger. Emily's smile faltered as she tried to play it off, but I could tell she was scared. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. I couldn't help but smile to myself as I watched them unravel. Ryan tried to confront her, but Emily just kept saying, "It's not what you think, Ryan, I swear." But there was no convincing him. He had seen it all. And me? I was standing just outside the bar, watching the chaos unfold. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about power. The power to make someone feel the fear I had felt. The power to tear down everything she had built. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt since before she left me. Control. The chaos that erupted in the bar that night was the kind of thing you see in movies. Something so surreal, so full of raw emotion, that it doesn't seem possible it could be real. But there I was, standing just outside, watching as Emily's carefully constructed world began to crumble around her. Ryan had stormed out of the bar, rage in his eyes, leaving Emily standing there, her face pale and stricken with disbelief. She had no idea how to fix the situation. No words left to manipulate him into believing her lies. I could hear the muffled sounds of her pleading through the thick glass windows. But it was too late. She had no control anymore. I had taken it all. Inside, Emily was collapsing. She was a shell of the confident, manipulative woman she had been just hours ago. She didn't know where to go, who to turn to. She had no way of stopping the destruction I had unleashed upon her. Ryan was done with her. And what's worse, she knew there was no one left to save her. No one left to protect her from the consequences of her actions. I walked away from the bar, my heart pounding in my chest. The adrenaline was almost intoxicating. For the first time since she left me, I felt alive. I felt like I had reclaimed something I had lost the day she walked out on me. Control. But it didn't end there. The night was just beginning, and I knew there was more to do. The following morning, I woke up to the cold reality that Emily was no longer the woman I once loved. She was a stranger, a manipulator, a liar, and I wasn't done with her. Not by a long shot. I knew I needed to make sure she understood just how much I had learned about her. How far I had gone to expose the lies she had spun for years. She needed to know that I had uncovered every detail of her affair, every deception she had tried to hide, and every secret she thought she could keep buried forever. That day, I decided to take things a step further. I sent Emily a message. I knew she would check her phone, especially after the scene with Ryan. She would be anxious to explain herself, to try to salvage whatever shred of her life she could. But what I sent her wasn't what she expected. The message was simple. I hope you're ready to face the consequences. This is just the beginning. I watched as she read it, her face pale as she stared at her phone. I could see the panic setting in. She knew what it meant. I had already caused so much damage, and now I was going to make sure the whole world knew exactly who she was. But my revenge wasn't going to stop with just Ryan. I had a plan. I had spent years building a network of people who could help me tear her down. People she had betrayed, people who had seen the real Emily. I wasn't going to just expose her to Ryan. I was going to expose her to everyone. Her friends, her family, her colleagues. Everyone. I had collected everything, every email, every text, every photo. I had proof of her lies, of her manipulations, of the double life she had led while I was at home, trusting her. I had all the ammunition I needed. I called a few of her close friends, the ones who had once been loyal to her, the ones who had seen her at her best and her worst. I told them everything. I shared the screenshots of her messages, the ones where she had openly admitted to her affairs, to her lies. I made sure they knew the truth. It didn't take long for the ripple effect to begin. First, her best friend called her, furious, demanding to know why she had lied to her for so long. Then her sister called, asking if it was true that she had been seeing other men while still married. Emily's world was slowly unraveling, thread by thread. The lies were no longer hers to control. She couldn't hide from the truth anymore. Later that day, I received a message from her. Please, Mark, stop. You've made your point. I've lost everything. Please let me fix this. I'll do anything. It was the desperate plea of a woman who had finally realized the magnitude of the situation she was in. For once, she wasn't the one calling the shots. For once, I held the power. But I wasn't ready to stop yet. I had one final move left to make. I called Ryan. I knew that he was still reeling from the shock, still angry and confused. But he needed to know the whole truth. He deserved to know just how far Emily's web of lies extended. I told him everything, every detail, every affair, every conversation I had uncovered. I made sure he knew that Emily hadn't just betrayed him. She had betrayed me. She had betrayed everyone who had ever trusted her. And when I finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. Ryan was stunned. He couldn't believe it. The woman he had trusted had been playing him all along, just like she had played me. The next few days were nothing short of catastrophic for Emily. Her reputation was in tatters. Her friends turned their backs on her. Her family was furious, questioning everything she had ever said. Ryan, of course, broke up with her. But more than that, he exposed her to his own network of friends and colleagues, people who had no idea what kind of person she truly was. Emily had no one left. I watched from the shadows as her world crumbled, piece by piece. She had been the architect of her own destruction. And in the end, she realized that she had no one to blame but herself. It had been a week since the explosion. Emily's life was in complete ruin. Her friends had abandoned her. Ryan had cut all ties. Her family was shunning her, and the social media world was turning against her. The silence from her side was deafening. She was crushed, lost in the mess of her own making. But that wasn't enough. I wasn't going to let her have the closure she wanted. I had one last piece of the puzzle to expose. Emily had always been proud of her career. She had worked hard to climb the corporate ladder, manipulating situations and people to her advantage. Her job was the last thing she had left. It was the last shred of dignity she could hold on to. Couldn't let that stand. I had spent a week digging into her professional life, speaking to former colleagues and employers. What I found wasn't just disturbing. It was shocking. Emily had used her charm and manipulation to sabotage people's careers, to steal credit for others' work, and to get ahead at any cost. Her rise had been built on lies and backstabbing. I made sure to send every bit of that information to the company's top executives. I wasn't going to let her get away with thinking she could keep that life intact. By the time I woke up the next morning, Emily was out of a job. She had been publicly humiliated, exposed for what she truly was. And this time there was no escaping it. Her reputation was shattered. She called me that night. I didn't pick up. I didn't need to hear her apologies. I had already seen her for who she truly was. She was done. It's strange how quickly everything changes. One moment you're living a life you think is secure, and the next, everything falls apart. I watched Emily, once confident and untouchable, transform into a ghost of the woman she had been. There was no dignity left, no pride, just a shell, wandering aimlessly through the wreckage I had created. But even in the midst of all this destruction, Emily wasn't ready to admit defeat. She still thought she could salvage something, anything, of her life. And so, she came to me. She showed up at my door one evening, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She looked exhausted, broken. It was almost sad to see, but I didn't feel sympathy. I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "Mark," she began, her voice shaking, "I don't know what to say. You've taken everything from me. You've exposed me for what I am. But I'm still here. I'm still alive. Can't we start over? Can't we fix this?" I couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was dark, bitter. "Start over? You think you can just come back into my life like nothing happened?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but filled with venom. "You destroyed everything, Emily. You don't get to just erase that." Her face twisted with frustration, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I truly am. I didn't know what I was doing. I was lost. I didn't realize the pain I caused you." I stared at her for a long moment. Every apology, every tear, felt hollow to me now. There was no redemption for her. Not for what she had done. "You never cared about me, Emily. You only cared about yourself," I said coldly. "You think you can fix this by begging me to forgive you? You can't undo the damage you've done." Her shoulders slumped, and she stepped back, as if she had just been slapped. "Then what do you want from me? What do you want me to do?" I didn't respond right away. I just watched her, the woman who had shattered my world, now completely broken herself. It was clear she didn't know how to fix things. She couldn't. In that moment, I realized that there was nothing left to say. She had taken too much, and I had already taken everything from her. The game was over. Without another word, I shut the door in her face. And as I did, I knew that she would never truly understand the depth of what I had done. But that didn't matter anymore. I had won. The silence after Emily left was suffocating. But it wasn't a silence of regret or doubt. It was the kind of silence you feel when you've crossed a line, when you've done what you had to do to get the closure you needed. I had made her pay for every lie, every betrayal. And now, as the days passed, I began to realize that the weight of it was lifting off my shoulders. She didn't deserve any more of my time or energy. The world I had once known, the life with Emily, was gone, and I had no intention of trying to resurrect it. I focused on rebuilding mine. I threw myself into work, I reconnected with old friends, and I began to focus on myself. But something inside me still stirred. A part of me wondered, had I gone too far? No. I had done exactly what I needed to do. Emily had ruined me for years. She had broken my trust, shattered everything I thought I knew about love, and I had every right to make her feel the weight of it. I wasn't sorry. But then, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Emily's lawyer. At first, I thought it was a joke. But when I opened the envelope, the gravity of it hit me like a punch to the gut. Emily was suing me for harassment. It was laughable at first. Harassment? She was the one who had betrayed me. She was the one who had ruined everything, and now she was trying to play the victim? I was furious. She couldn't even accept the consequences of her own actions. But as I read through the letter, something shifted in me. She had found a new angle. She was going to try to turn the story on its head, to make it look like I was the one in the wrong. She would paint me as the obsessive ex, as the man who couldn't move on. I couldn't let this happen. I had spent too much time exposing her, too much effort in making sure she understood the consequences of her actions. Now I had to fight back. This wasn't over. I contacted my own lawyer and we began to prepare. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. She had taken everything from me, and now she was trying to do it again. But I wasn't going to let her win. This was the final chapter, and I was going to write it on my own terms. The court date was set for the following month. I had no idea what to expect, but I wasn't going to back down. Emily thought she could turn the tables on me, but I was ready for whatever she threw at me. And this time, I wouldn't just expose her lies. I would make sure she never tried to hurt anyone again. The day of the trial arrived. Emily sat across from me, her expression a mix of defiance and desperation. Her lawyer was a seasoned professional, but I didn't care. This time, I had everything in my corner. Her accusations were weak. She tried to paint me as a stalker, a man obsessed with revenge. But the evidence I presented, her messages, the countless betrayals, spoke louder than anything she could say. As her lawyer stumbled through weak arguments, I watched Emily's confidence start to crack. When the judge ruled in my favor, I felt no joy, just relief. Emily had lost and I had won. But something felt different now. The revenge, the destruction. It had all been necessary, but it left me hollow. I was done with her. The chapter was closed. After the trial, Emily disappeared. Her social media went quiet. I heard rumors that she had moved out of state, trying to start over. I didn't care. My life, on the other hand, began to rebuild. I focused on work, on myself. But there was a lingering emptiness, a nagging feeling that something was still missing. One night, I ran into Ryan at a bar. He was a shadow of the man I had seen with Emily, quieter now, scarred by the betrayal. We exchanged a few words. He didn't blame me for what happened, he blamed her. And somehow that felt like a small victory. But as the months went by, I realized that revenge had done little to heal me. The anger, the bitterness, it was all still there, buried deep inside. Maybe Emily had been the catalyst for everything, but now I had to find my own peace. It's strange how time changes things. In the months that followed, I began to reflect on everything, on the pain Emily caused, the revenge I exacted, and the emptiness I felt even after it was all over. The rage had faded, but so had the satisfaction I once thought would fill the void. I had destroyed her, and in the process I thought I would reclaim my life. But the truth was, I hadn't really gotten anything back. My life had moved forward, but so had hers, though in a way, I knew she would never be the same. And deep down, neither would I. The hardest thing to accept was that, even after all the anger and betrayal, I still carried pieces of the past with me. The relationship, the lies, the hurt. It would always be a part of who I was. But I no longer needed the revenge to define me. I realized that real peace doesn't come from destroying someone else. It comes from letting go. So I let go. I never heard from Emily again, and maybe that was for the best. I didn't need closure from her. I found my own. And in the quiet, I finally learned to heal. This is the end of the story, but it doesn't have to be the end for you. What do you think? Was it worth the journey? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Because sometimes, the true lesson isn't in revenge. It's in finding the strength to move forward.